So the Italian government falls again, and the people of Italy are going to vote for a new government again. What happened? Let's find out with Professor Luigi Di Gregorio. Luigi, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Guy.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
So for the folks who are not really familiar with political situation in Italy, can you provide us a little bit of background? So a week or two ago, Mario Draghi's, the Prime Minister resigns, his government is no longer sustainable, and we're going to a new election in March. What happened?
What happened? Well, first of all, I want to thank you for your invitation, and I hope that my answers can be useful to clarify the situation of a rather complex political system as the Italian one.
Let's do it.
So we should start maybe by briefly explaining the main difference between our forms of government. Whereas the United States are a presidential democracy, Italy is a parliamentary democracy like United Kingdom. This means that you vote for the president. We do not vote for our prime minister. Our prime minister is selected by our chief of state, which is also not elected. And he or she must have the vote of confidence by the majority of the members of parliament. Okay. Otherwise, the cabinet cannot work and the ministers have to resign. This is just to have a big picture. What happened to the Draghi government is something peculiar. Why? Because the Draghi government was somehow special from the beginning. It was born as a national unity government, which means that it had the support of all the political parties in parliament, except one, Fratelli d'Italia, the Brothers of Italy. The reason for this special majority was quite simple. We had to deal with COVID, mass vaccination, green pass, restrictions, and so on. We had to deal with the next generation EU funds, which means around 300 billion of loans by the European Union. And later also with the Russian-Ukrainian war and its consequences, so cost of energy, inflation, cost of living, new inequalities, etc.
Immigration into Italy, big issue.
In order to manage this hard and complex platform of policies, our chief of state decided to call Mario Draghi, the best profile and the best public figure that our country could have as a prime minister in that moment. The problem is that a cabinet like this can go on in an inter-electoral phase when general elections are very far in the future. Since we are now quite close to the end of the parliamentary term and to the new elections, of course, political parties 1 month ago, more or less, started to be nervous and try to differentiate themselves in order to position themselves in the electoral market. In particular, the first party to show this change of direction was the Five Star Movements, with Giuseppe Conte, our former prime minister.
Hold on. Before we get into all of those, I do want to get into all of those. But before that, can you speak a little bit about Draghi? Because he's a unique character. He's a former head of the World Bank, if I'm correct. He's a
European Central Bank, not World Bank.
European Central Bank. He's a Brussels kind of guy, right? He's one of the big European Union kind of characters.
Yes, and also he's a perfect technician. The Draghi figure was born in the banks, in the Italian bank before, in the Central Italian Bank, and then in the European Central Bank. So he's absolutely not a politician. And this is interesting to explain the crisis. Why? Because Giuseppe Conte, our former leader, when decided to change direction, he decided to move his party into the opposition, to have 8 months to criticize the governments and to go on in the opinion polls, because we are going to face a crisis in this fall, an economic crisis. However, Draghi is not a politician, so he's not so glued to the prime minister chair, of course. His career has been fabulous. He has not a political party. He does not have any intention to candidate himself in parliament in the future. So he immediately decided to face the parties in parliament, stating again that the platform was the same as before and that he would not have accepted any deviation from that track. After his speech, two other parties decided to leave the majority, and then he immediately resigned. That's why we are not going to vote on March, but we are going to vote in 2 months at the end of September now, because our chief of state had to dissolve the parliament and
by the way, I think Italy is having a competition with Israel about who can have more elections in a shorter amount of time. I'm not sure who's leading right now. All right, so public opinion polls indicate that the next government is going to be formed by the right wing. Some say the far right wing. What I was really hoping to do with you is to have you kind of map out for us who are some of the key players in this presumed next coalition, right? If you can speak just for 2 minutes about Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy, the 5-Star Movement, and of course, the man who makes Donald Trump look like a Boy Scout, Silvio Berlusconi of my favorite team, AC Milan, formerly. Please go ahead.
Nice. Okay, first of all, we should explain that Italy has a lot of political parties. It's completely different from the United States. And since we have an electoral system which is mixed, it's in part is plurality system like US, and in part is a proportional representation, usually all these parties tend to form two broad coalitions to win the seats in the single-member districts. The Brothers of Italy, together with Forza Italia, Silvio Berlusconi's party, and the League, Matteo Salvini's party, they form the right coalition, these three parties. In the last more or less 25 years, the coalition has always been the same, but the relative strength inside the coalition changed a lot, because for a long time, Berlusconi was the leader of the biggest party of this coalition. Then 5 years ago, the League, Matteo Salvini's party, became the biggest party until last year, and now Giorgia Meloni is definitely ahead, according to the opinion polls, also because she exploited many years always spent into the opposition. The Brothers of Italy is the most nationalist party, traditionally, even in the name, it's quite clear, but recently has moved towards a generally conservative platform and positioning. And Giorgia Meloni's aim, we can say that, is to transform the party in the right party in Italy.
So is she the Italian version of Marine Le Pen? Is that
exactly.
fair?
And okay, also the process is very similar. She's talking also to the moderate and to the liberal voters, and she's trying to broaden the approval and the voting intentions. I mean, the right is there, and she owns the right. Now she wants to talk to the.
But what are maybe the 1 or 2 top items on her agenda? Is it economics? Is it immigration? Is it tax reform?
I mean, there are 2 main parts of the agenda, in my opinion. One is value-based, which is typically conservative, against politically correctness, against identity politics, a typically conservative agenda in terms of cultural values, and also the questions about immigration, the relationship with the European Union, which is quite critical when not skeptical. So it's a platform quite similar to the conservative platform in UK, and also with the Republican Party in the United States, more or less.
Okay, good. And so how is the 5-Star Movement different?
5-Star Movement it's really a particular party. First of all, it's a recent party. It was born 10 years ago, more or less, exploiting the very strong anti-establishment and anti-politics mood of many Italians in that moment. In 2013, at the general election, it was already the first party with 25% of votes. And then 5 years later, it was even stronger with 33% of votes. So 1 Italian out of 3 voted for them. But after that election, everything changed, because their position for years has been against all the other political parties. then changed completely, and they formed the government at first with the League, so a right party. After that, with Democratic Party, so a leftist party. And in the end, they also supported the Draghi government with left and right. So all these turning tables had consequences, of course, on the voting intentions. And now the party is alone again against all others. But it's the electoral way, it seems to be around 10%, more or less. And I think that their credibility has gone for many voters, because in 5 years, too many change of position.
And it's kind of interesting when you turn from an ideological party to a party that actually needs to govern and maintain a coalition, right? You have to be more pragmatic, make compromises, and that really undermines some of the voter relationships.
They were together just in this anti-establishment mood and attitude. But then when you govern, you have to decide, and you have to have a platform. And they didn't have a platform, so they completely exploded when in the government. Consider from the five-star movements in the parliament, in 8 years, there were born 24 different parliamentary groups. From one party, 24 parliamentary groups.
Very high turnover. But before, I want to talk a lot more about the right, but let's talk about the left. Is the left, do they have any chance? I mean, who are the key players over there? What are they running on?
Okay, there's also a coalition on the left, which has a kind of pivot, a kind of main party, which is the Democratic Party. According to the voting intentions, is around 22-23% of the votes, and it's trying to form a broad coalition together with the more leftist parties, which are quite little, and the more centrist party, which are also quite little. So all these parties were together with Draghi, in the majority of Draghi, and they didn't vote against Draghi until the end. So they are trying to use the Draghi legacy in terms of imagine, in terms of agenda, in terms of electoral platform, and especially to scare the undecided voters, like if the right wins, Italy is gone. More or less, this is the message. It can work a bit, but I'm not sure that it can work to overturn completely the results. But we will see. We have 2 months of electoral campaign now.
Yeah, which is a very long time in politics. Right, let's go back. Let's assume that Giorgia Meloni is going to be the next leader of Italy. What can we assume may happen in terms of, let's talk about 3 different things. Okay, let's start with the European Union and the relationship with Italy, which is one of the largest economies in the EU.
Okay, let me see. There's a lot of concern about that around the world, but I would be more positive in this prediction. Why? First, there is a concern regarding the risk of an authoritarian turn. We read something like that during the Berlusconi's government in Italy, and again in 2018 during the Salvini and Five-Star Movement's government. And now it's the turn of Giorgia Meloni. I don't think there is this danger in any case. So there are no threats for Italian democracy. So first of all, I would say this. Second, of course, as I told you before, it would be a conservative coalition and a conservative government. This means that in terms of civil rights, identity politics, immigration, and so on, the positions are quite clear. But this doesn't mean automatically that Italy, again, becomes an illiberal democracy. These are disputed values, no? Somehow. I think it's normal in a democracy, the dialogue, even the conflict, the political conflict is normal and physiological. So democracy is the political regime more plural and more open. Now we must accept that, otherwise we become the first illiberal supporters. Third, the relationship with Brussels and the EU. Of course, they won't have the Draghi assurance, and this is a problem in terms of mutual trust. Moreover, Meloni and Salvini, as I told you before, positions towards the EU in the last years have been quite critical when not skeptical. But I'm sure this has to change necessarily, because EU is fundamental for Italy during this crisis. And Italy is very important for EU. EU was born in Rome in 1957. Italy is the second manufacturing power of Europe after Germany. I mean, there will not be an Italian exit or an Italy exit like UK in the agenda of the government. And I'm also quite sure that EU partners will try to bridge the gap between their positions and the government.
Luigi, if you can explain for people who may not be as familiar with the European Union politics, why? I mean, we saw it in Brexit. We see it in France with the rise of Marine Le Pen. I mean, she didn't win, but you know, she 1 out of 3 voters in France actually voted for National Front. We see it in Hungary with Orban. We see it in Holland. We see it with the Swedish Democrats. Why is there such a large suspicion of the European Union? Can you speak a little bit? I mean, because you said it was formed in Italy, but it has changed a lot. I mean, from the inception of the EU to this large bureaucracy that runs the lives of Europeans. What is it about the EU that pisses off so many Europeans?
I think two main things. The one is that the European Union is a strange monster in terms of we are used to deal with nation states, and nation states have a history also of pain, blood, wars, etc. European Union is somehow programmed, no, like around the table. No? People decided to do this super state, which is not a super state, which is not a history and something which is really strong in identity terms, no? And this is a problem. The second problem is, of course, the usual democratic deficit, which means that you vote for European Parliament, but European Parliament is not the European government does not have to have the vote of confidence of the European Parliament. So the two things are distinguished.
So there are a bunch of bureaucrats sitting in Brussels.
Yeah,
Some would argue, and they say they don't represent me in, you know, maybe in Toscana, you know?
Yeah, exactly. The main actor in European Union is the Commission, and the Commission is not elected, and the Commission is not representative of the government, so is bureaucratic technical actor. And third, maybe the fact that maybe the main actor in the last 10-15 years has been the European Central Bank, which is even more a problem for democratic countries, because we vote for a national government, and then our national government cannot work because a central bank, you know, a European central bank has to tell you what to do, how to do it, if you can do it or not. Because
and we saw that in Greece, right? I mean, that's where the
exactly. I think in Greece definitely started all this process with the Troika, Varoufakis, Syriza.
But listen, but there's another player in this game, and it's Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin straight up is trying to break up the EU in his own way. I had this conversation in a different episode. I was talking to somebody about Putin's overall strategy. What do you think about the relationship between Moscow and the nationalist movements all around, or the skeptical movements all around Europe?
Russia is another difficult file for the right majority in Italy, because both Berlusconi and Salvini had quite strong and well-known relationship with Putin. In this days, there's another case around Putin and Salvini in Italy. However, fortunately, they condemned quite soon the war, especially because Giorgia Meloni immediately did it when she was in US, by the way. And again, I would distinguish between the party positions in the electoral campaign, or even in the permanent campaign, and the positions in the government. We must distinguish between propaganda and politics, and between political parties and institutions. I mean, there is no chance that an Italian government outside the NATO or outside the US alliance, or even sympathetic with Putin, no chance. Of course, they will try to do it. They are trying to do it in Italy and even in Europe. I think in all the democratic countries, this is the cyber war, the Russian cyber war also. but I don't think there is the risk in Italy, even with this right government.
I get you. You know, I want to take this from a very practical conversation to a more academic one. You published a book called Demopathy and Democratic Malaise.
Yes.
Fancy academic words. What do they mean? And can you tell us about, take the book's central arguments and apply it to the current situation in Italian politics?
Well, in the book, I tried, it's another book on the crisis of democracy. There are a lot now. I tried to change the point of view. Usually, when you read books about the crisis of democracy or the democratic fatigue or the democratic malaise, which more or less are the same, you usually find as a guilty part the political parties, the crisis of representation, somehow the media, the personalization of politics, etc. And of course, these things are true. I tried to go deep in this analysis and to enlarge the big picture. And I decided that maybe the main hypothesis of this research could be reversed. So probably democratic regimes are in crisis because the demos, the people, we are changed. And how we changed in the last decades, you will discover reading the book. But of course, this means that I used, of course, a multidisciplinary approach, sociological, psychological, anthropological, literature taken by marketing and cognitive psychology, etc. Because I think that our individualistic and narcissistic somehow society is one of the main reasons of our democratic malaise. And I think this is interesting because it's a reverse hypothesis.
Interesting, and I encourage everybody to check out your book. I'll definitely put it up on the screen and put the links in the comment section, so make sure to check out the links. I'm sure that having an election every 1, 2, 3 years is not helping out either, all around different countries, wherever it's happening. But thank you so much for coming in and explaining to us some of the basics underlying the current crisis in Italian politics and the upcoming election. Of course, we wish the Italian people all the best and only good things. Professor Luigi Di Gregorio, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you very much. See you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.